Last week, Betty Pingle shared with us stories about the history of this congregation going back almost 150 years. And early on, she called her sermon self-indulgent. Now, I didn't think that was the case at all. I found it fascinating, but I'm afraid I may qualify as self-indulgent for my sermon today. This is only my second time in the pulpit here as an affiliated community minister. My day job is as the director of the ACLU of Colorado, and I could easily give you a fiery sermon about why we need to cut incarceration rates, or end the death penalty, or change immigration laws, or protect privacy, or make voting easier instead of harder, or finally reach full marriage equality, or stop eroding women's reproductive rights in the name of religion with ridiculous decisions like the recent Supreme Court ruling on Hobby Lobby. Maybe I'll do that sometime. I will mention that if you haven't heard about Amendment 67 yet on the Colorado ballot this fall, I encourage you to pay attention, because what sounds like an amendment to protect pregnant women is actually a serious attack on women. I'm not kidding that if this amendment passed, simply using the kinds of birth control that Hobby Lobby objected to could be defined as murder under Colorado law. Now, this is the work that I do all week. But even though I've been at the ACLU for about 2 years now, I haven't stopped being a Unitarian Universalist minister. At times, it helps to be a minister at the ACLU, since so many attacks on our rights and civil liberties happen in the name of religion. But that's not the kind of religion I aspire to live by. Whatever my primary employment may be, my Unitarian Universalist journey is still a defining story of my life. And so instead of the issues I work on at the ACLU, I'd like to focus this morning on parts of my religious journey and how I have come to understand Unitarian Universalism as a religion. Now you can see why this sermon qualifies as self-indulgent, but I hope you will give me a pass. I just used the words religious and religion, and I did it on purpose, even though I realize that some of us might prefer not to think of Unitarian Universalism as a religion, a movement, or a tradition, or a philosophy, or a community perhaps, but not a religion. The official name of this congregation, First Unitarian Society of Denver, not church, reflects some of that long-standing discomfort with religion. If what we have in mind is the kind of religion that would allow Hobby Lobby to deny contraceptive coverage to its employees, then I fully understand. But I do consider Unitarian Universalism to be a religion, just a different kind of religion. So it's fair to ask, what do I even mean by the word religion? It is not one that's easy to define. If you look at English language dictionary definitions of religion, the first definitions usually say something about the worship of God or a system of beliefs and practices pertaining to the supernatural. Based on definitions such as these, some Texas officials about a decade ago tried to claim that Unitarian Universalism is not a religion and therefore should be denied tax exemption. But a decision or a definition like this is clearly inadequate for a lot of reasons beyond us. It leaves out many Eastern religions, such as Taoism or Buddhism, which are not built upon beliefs about God or the supernatural. More inclusive attempts to define religion appeal to concepts such as ultimate concern, meaning and values, ritual and myth, or way of life. The problem is that these definitions tend to be so broad that it's hard to distinguish religion from any other kind of philosophy or practice or point of view. Defining religion is hard enough that some authorities simply punt. The 1990 Barnes & Noble Cambridge Encyclopedia defines religion by stating that no single definition will suffice to encompass the various sets of traditions, practices, and ideas which constitute different religions. Now, that's a non-definition if I ever heard one. But they might be right. Perhaps a clue to the meaning of religion can be found in the origins of the word. The most likely Latin root for the word religion means to tie back or to bind. Now, here again, the lesson is ambiguous. If religion is meant to tie us down, to bind or restrain our thoughts, actions, and freedom, it is not what most of us want. Unfortunately, religion for much of history and in many places has been binding in this way. In most places and times, people have been required to follow the religion of the king or political leader, and to dissent has been deadly or unthinkable. Unitarian Universalism has been an outlier in this regard, going all the way back to the declarations of religious tolerance in 16th century Transylvania, led by the only example in history of Unitarian royalty. Now, there's another way to think about this root meaning of tying or binding. These words suggest the notion of commitment or covenant, a core religious concept. And it's a concept that is found in our own statement of principles and purposes. There's also the notion in tying or binding of connection, that religion is relational and communal. Ideally, religion should bind us all together in our common humanity and in our connection to all life, not simply bind small groups of people together in opposition to each other. Our universalism strives toward that higher ideal, and you can see it in the statements on our wall. There's a unity that makes us one. Every soul is sacred. Not everyone thinks of religion as communal. The theologian Alfred North Whitehead said that religion is what the individual does with his own solitariness. In contrast, author William Newsman said that regardless of what else may be said of religion, it is a social phenomenon. It is something that people do in groups. Well, there's an aspect of truth in both. The truth in Whitehead's statement is that authentic religion is never just for show. It is something we live by even when we know that no one else is watching, even in our solitariness. But I also agree that there is something necessarily communal about religion. Relationships are at the core of what it means to be human, and religion is a communal and relational response to the biggest questions and mysteries of human life. Who are we? What is birth and death? What makes life worth living? How should we live in relationship to each other and the world around us? Different religions focus more on some aspects of these questions than on others, such as Buddhism on the question of why we suffer, or Christianity on questions of origins and eternity, guilt and redemption. In our society, we are accustomed to defining a religious community by a creed or a shared set of metaphysical beliefs. This is part of why Unitarian Universalism doesn't always look like a religion. For us, asking, what do Unitarian Universalists believe, is the wrong question. It would be better to ask, what do we love? What do we do? What are our commitments? And how do we live our lives? Doug Mutter wrote an article for the UU World just before General Assembly this year in which he said he doesn't believe in our 7 principles. Belief is the wrong way to look at them, he says. As beliefs, they are rather general and weak. Who cares if we just say we believe in justice and equity and compassion and dignity and democracy and interdependence and so on? And what does that even mean? But if we are committed to making them a lived reality, if they are a vision for a world we are striving to create, then they are suddenly very challenging and very powerful. Now, I care a lot about our Unitarian Universalist statement of principles and purposes, partly because it's played a very big role in my own religious journey. I grew up in a mainstream Methodist tradition, but in college I had an encounter with a toxic form of religion that sought out vulnerable students and tried to break them for the purpose of proselytizing or saving them. I left college knowing that any religion I could be a part of would have to be a different kind of religion from what I had known, but I had no idea what that might be. In June of 1985, just a few months before the fire here at First Unitarian, I visited a Unitarian Universalist congregation for the first time in my life in Iowa City, Iowa, at the suggestion of my sister. The Statement of Principles and Purposes, which is better called the Principles and Sources, was out on a table still labeled draft because it was just a week before the final adoption of this statement at the 1985 General Assembly. When I read through it, I realized that this was a place I could belong, and I found my religious home. Since that time, I've reflected on that statement many times. I've taught classes several years in a row on the principles and sources. I met some of the members of the committee that drafted that document after input from many congregations. I don't think the statement is perfect or that it should never be revised, but when a revision to the sources was proposed that turned the sources into a long single paragraph, I spoke at General Assembly on behalf of the more poetic version of the sources that we have now, pointing out that no one would have written a sources cantata based on the paragraph that was proposed. Immediately after I spoke, someone called the question, and by a narrow margin, the current principles and sources were left as they are. Now again, I don't think any of our words are perfect or should never be changed. There were some good ideas in the proposed changes, but the only choices at the time were either to adopt all the changes or none of them. We're clear that the principles and sources are not a creed that we pretend was handed down to us by God, and the evolution of our religious tradition over time is a strength, not a weakness. The sources have already been amended once, adding earth-based traditions along with mystery, prophetic voices, our Christian and Jewish heritage, other religions of the world, and science and humanism as sources of our faith. The sources are the theme for our congregation this month, and I encourage you to read them and to reflect on how all the sources help inform your understanding of your life and the world. Of course, the very idea that we have many sources is something that makes Unitarian Universalism a different kind of religion. In a way, for us, everything is a source. The whole universe is our Bible, you could say. But what kind of a religion is that? It's been nearly 3 decades now since I walked into that first service in Iowa City, putting me on the path to UU ministry, and I still ask those questions. If you will indulge me in my self-indulgence, here are some of my thoughts about that. There is not just one correct way to express the essence of our religion, but that fact is part of what defines us. We're open to evolution of our faith, and science and learning as well as mystery are no threat to us. I would say there is both an individual and a communal aspect to our faith tradition. Individually, each one of us is on a spiritual journey, and I would characterize the essence of Unitarian Universalism for each of us individually as a commitment to stay on a certain kind of journey throughout our lives. That journey is about love. Love for truth, love for life, love for all people and all that is good. It's not about claiming to know or possess truth with a capital T. Instead, it's about loving and being open to what is true about nature, God, or the universe, whether we know it or not, and whether we're even capable of knowing it fully or not. We can have individual beliefs, even very strong ones, and that's legitimate. It's okay as long as we maintain an even deeper openness to the underlying reality we may or may not know, whether or not it matches what we believe right now. However much we know, there's always more to learn, and we never have all the answers. As Episcopal Bishop Spong once said, idolatry is religion pretending it has all the answers. Our sources warn us against that type of idolatry. The journey of love is also about celebrating the gift of life, caring for the planet that is our home, the life upon it, and particularly our human companions on the journey, leaving no one out. As hard as it may be to see sometimes, there is that spark of worth in every person, even those who do not see it in us. And even when patterns of evil embody themselves in human thought and action, it is never human life itself that is evil. You could say these are beliefs of mine, but along with Doug Mutter, they matter more to me as a vision for how I live my life rather than as an abstract set of beliefs. Ours is a religion that calls to be put into action. And I remind myself that even when we are suing people or institutions at the ACLU for the sake of justice, it's not about hating them. I can try to stop what they do, but even the owners of Hobby Lobby or the sponsors of Amendment 67 are not objects of my hate. The way I see it, challenging people or structures that disempower others and working to defend the civil liberties of every person is very consistent with a religion that affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It is a spiritual discipline to stay on that path, to remain open to truth, to be willing to listen and to keep learning, to honor the dignity of every person, to work for justice, but never to hate. It's a humble path and an authentic path. And it's not something watered down or just barely religious. When it's done well, I think it's what religion really ought to be. And it's hard or perhaps impossible to do alone. Religion is also about community and covenant and relationship. Together we create what we cannot do alone. Together we sing and we worship. Together we learn from each other. And together we are more powerful in our actions for justice. Together we find solace in the losses and the hard places of life and in the struggles for survival in an economically divided world. We are not alone. We do need the communal aspect of religion. But as Mike described 2 weeks ago, the institutions of religion in this nation are mostly in decline, and Unitarian Universalism is doing well to hold its own. I don't know where we're headed, if our congregations will grow or if our congregations will decline as churches have in most of Europe, or if we will thrive by being different, by being flexible and outward-looking and more genuinely inclusive, creating places for spiritual depth and collective action, connecting across generations in fun and in gratitude for this life, developing new ways to live out our different kind of religion. Mike said it was refreshing at GA this year that there was an open wonder about how we should proceed into the future, rather than a sense that GA was just a place for the experts to tell everyone else what to think and do. Now, our own history has an anti-institutional thread that goes way back to Emerson and the Transcendentalists, a thread that sometimes holds us back from effective functioning, but also reminds us to be creative and to be open to different ways of being religious. As much as I care about Unitarian Universalism as an institution, I've said in other places that if given the choice between a world that embodies our values but in which formal Unitarian Universalism has faded away, or a world in which Unitarian Universalism has grown, but only in conflict with a more hostile world, I would clearly choose the former. We don't own the exclusive rights to our different kind of religion, and I wouldn't want us to. I've seen both the best and the worst of Christianity, for example, and in other religions in my interfaith work. My wife is an Episcopal priest, and I'm happy to join cause with her or with the open-hearted, inside or outside any religious tradition. It would be fine if our values grew without us. But I suspect, however, that the world will do better, and we will do better, if our Unitarian Universalist institutions continue to grow and evolve and thrive in whatever form is best suited to our changing world. It is our core commitment to a journey of openness and love that will not change, not a creed or an institutional structure. But we will always need a communal form of religion. something that binds us together in love, reminding us of the underlying wonder and unity of all life. I hope this congregation will be here thriving 150 years and more from now. Together, fearlessly, guided by love, may we take the next steps on that path. Amen.